The cameras found them all at once. Bright studio lights, a hum of electricity, millions watching from kitchen tables, bars, and bedroom couches. The night had been billed as a showdown, and on stage sat the three men who would make it one. Former President Barack Obama, composed but ready. President Donald Trump, every inch the larger-than-life presence. And Vice President J. D. Vance, younger, steady, the sort who looks like he's been waiting for his cue. The first question landed like a thrown glove. How's the country doing 200 days into Trump's second term? The audience sucked in a breath. Moderators glanced down at their notes. Obama leaned forward, his expression sharpening, and when he spoke it was slow and cold. In just 200 days, he said, this administration has dismantled what we worked so hard to build. You've undone progress, Donald. You govern with insults and impulse. It's reckless. It's beneath this office. His words cut through the studio, precise and unapologetic. Trump said nothing at first, a rare stillness from the man used to roaring back. Around him, eyes flicked. Some in the crowd murmured assent. Others bristled. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. The former president pressed on, voice gaining steam. There's no record worth celebrating here. The same chaos that marked your first term is back. Your allies are mocked, our institutions ridiculed. America deserves better. It was the kind of takedown that made headlines before the debate even finished. But the drama didn't stop with Obama's lines. The room pivoted toward the vice president. Vance sat up, hands steady on the desk, his jaw tight with focus. He had not interrupted. He didn't need to. When he exhaled and spoke, the hush that followed felt almost ceremonial. Mr. Obama, Vance began, calm but fierce. You've had your say. But let's be honest about what you call leadership. He looked at the camera, not just across the stage. When 2016 didn't go the way you wanted, you and your allies pushed a narrative, the Russia collusion story, that tore at the fabric of our politics. It was a campaign to nullify the people's choice. That wasn't democracy. That was betrayal. The reaction was immediate. Audible gasps, a ripple that moved from one side of the room to the other. Obama's expression tightened. A smile that had felt confident moments earlier flattened. Vance didn't wait for applause. He kept going, voice rising with conviction. You accused this president of arrogance, he said. But you were the one operating from behind the curtain, directing narratives while others did the heavy lifting. You and your circle ignored the concerns of everyday Americans. You left communities behind. And while you lecture tonight, our borders opened wider. Crime and drugs seeped into towns, and people who felt abandoned looked for a different path. They voted for it. Twice. You can't accept that. People in the live audience began to stand, shout, clap, a chorus of emotion that reflected the split-screen America in which millions followed every syllable on their phones. Trump leaned back with a small, satisfied nod. Reporters scrambled for quotes. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman's hands trembled as she wiped at her cheeks. Someone behind her whispered, finally. Obama tried to reclaim the floor. He straightened his jacket, pushed his hair back, and shot Vance a look that carried both rebuke and disbelief. Jay, he said, don't flatter yourself as some independent voice. Defending this administration doesn't make you principled. It makes you complicit. This presidency has isolated our country, humiliated allies, and turned the dignity of the office into a spectacle. It was a sharp retort, but it landed differently. The studio's energy shifted, not uniformly, but noticeably. A few in the audience booed. Others frowned. Vance's posture never wavered. He folded his fingers on the desk and responded with something quieter, harder. Sir, I'm not complicit, he said. I was elected alongside him. I took an oath to the American people. We're not beholden to the same set of interests you served. We put the focus back on manufacturing, on secure borders, on putting citizens first. You speak about dignity, but how does that square with the attempts to delegitimize an election because it didn't go your way? How does that look to the people whose votes you dismissed? Vance's words landed with the bluntness of someone swinging a hammer. He circled back, naming names, invoking 2017, the investigations, the headlines that never quite stopped. You and others pushed a theory that fractured trust in our institutions, he said. That wasn't oversight. That was an effort to overturn the democratic will, and that matters to millions who felt their voices stolen. For a moment, the studio seemed to suspend itself, breathless. The moderators exchanged glances. Camera lens locked on Obama, whose face had gone compact and controlled. He opened his mouth, then closed it. A small, almost invisible recalibration. Across living rooms, viewers paused mid-scroll as clips began their inevitable spread across social media. The debate that had been so promising fireworks had become something that was sharper. A battle of narrative, of who would get to define the past and lay claim to the future. Vance is vulgar, accusing, and at the same time balanced in his wording of residence in a home of the people who felt disregarded. With steadfast glare at the vice president, Trump allowed the moment to play until the end. He did not have to talk. Every nod of approval said it all. Obama returned to the attack, harsher now, edged with impatience. You can spin the past all you want, he said, but the facts remain. This administration has harmed America's standing, trampled norms, and eroded the trust of our allies. Historians will judge this term harshly. The response in the room was uneven. Some clapped politely. Others booed. The tide that had once seemed to be rolling in Obama's direction had fractured, and new currents pulled toward Vance's framing. The former president's composure flickered. It was clear he hadn't expected the younger conservative to cut through the way he did. Vance moved in for the close, voice steady, every syllable deliberate. You talk about facts, he said, and the people remember factories closed, jobs lost, promises made and forgotten. They remember communities hollowed out. They also remember the push to undermine an outcome because it wasn't the result you wanted. That's not leadership. That's trying to rewrite the rules when you lose. The American people saw that and chose differently. The studio broke into a bout of cheering and weeping. All that excited, unclean kind of sound that makes the newspapers and feeds the social mediums. Obama scanned the room and looked for purchase as applause rolled in waves across the floor. The story had gone off balance, at least that night, and millions of the audience felt like they had witnessed a turning point in real time. It was easy to remember that exchange as the moderators tried to bring the discussion back on track, to policy. Clips of Vance's retort were already looping online. Pundits began to parse it, to place it in the arc of the larger conversation. For many who watched, it wasn't just another zinger in a long season of televised skirmishes. It felt definitive, the moment a younger generation spoke back and, for a heartbeat, changed how the country would remember the argument. The power he once held was slipping through his fingers, and J.D. Vance was only just getting started. His voice found a new edge, each sentence landing like a hammer. You call President Trump arrogant, he said, voice steady and hard. But what you call arrogance is a cover for a manufactured story. Whispers about Russia meant to tarnish a victory you couldn't accept. Arrogance is pretending Joe Biden was fit when he wasn't because you wanted a puppet. Arrogance is thinking you could keep fooling the American people forever. The studio erupted. People stood, some waving small flags they'd brought. Tears shone on faces. The camera swept across the crowd, catching the raw reactions. Anger, relief, disbelief. Trump leaned in toward J.D. and murmured something only the two of them could hear. Vance nodded without breaking his gaze from Obama, his composure locked. Here's the truth, sir, he said, each word deliberate. You weren't safeguarding America. You were safeguarding your interests. You made fortunes while ordinary families lost everything. That's why this moment terrifies you, because the truth finally caught up. Obama stiffened. The comment came flying in cleaner than he thought it would. The disputing voices of the controllers could not restrain anymore. The hall was already beyond control. Turned on. The moment had fallen. JD had taken. There was electricity in the studio, as if the room was about to blow up just before a storm. The moderators floundered, not really knowing whether to intervene or to leave things to take their course. Obama sat back and worked his jaw, pride smarting, but not yet all his. Outside the studio, the impact was immediate. Social platforms lit up. Vance shuts down Obama, trended within minutes. Clips multiplied as viewers clicked and reshared the exchange. A retired Marine in Florida dabbed at his eyes and whispered, "Finally, someone speaks for us." A single mom in Detroit punched the air from her couch and shouted, "That's it, JD. Say it." The scene at home mirrored the chaos in the studio. Phones held high, families leaning forward. The moderator's plea, "Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's keep order," barely registered. The night had morphed into something else. A reckoning. JD sat upright, shoulders squared, eyes fixed. There was no hesitation in him now. He wasn't just defending Trump. He was speaking for the people who felt abandoned, overlooked, and betrayed. And the crowd recognized it. Obama rose to answer, but his voice wavered. "You can shout all you want, JD," he said, "but shouting doesn't make falsehoods true. The truth is President Trump divided this nation. His reckless choices harmed minority communities, strained alliances, and damaged America's standing abroad. History won't forgive that." The words drew polite applause, but the force behind them had thinned. He no longer filled the room with the same unquestioned authority. He seemed to be scrambling to hold the floor. JD leaned in, calm and unsparing. "Mr. Obama," he replied, "history doesn't let off leaders who misled their people. It won't excuse open borders, the flood of drugs into neighborhoods, towns left to rot while elites prospered. That was your record." A collective intake of breath swept the audience. Obama tried a tight smile. Sweat beaded at his temple. Trump watched, arms folded, a satisfied smirk forming. For years, critics had painted Trump as fighting alone. Tonight, the perception shifted. Vance stood as his own force, not merely a deputy. JD's voice rose, cutting through the buzz. "You accuse President Trump of splitting the country," he said, "but you split it long before him. You promised hope and change, then left millions in despair. You watched factories close and jobs vanish as you and your circle grew wealthier." The statement landed like a blow. Silence, stunned and complete, filled the studio. Even the moderators stayed still. "And let's be clear," JD continued, pointing toward Obama with a composed intensity. "When you talk about corruption, remember what you allowed. You pushed forward a candidate who was visibly diminished, while people behind the curtain pulled the strings. That wasn't leadership. It was manipulation. It was betrayal." The audience roared back, some sobbing, others raising hands to the ceiling and chanting agreement. Obama tried to reply. His sentence stumbled and sputtered against the wall of clapping and cheers. In that instant, the balance in the room had shifted. It felt like watching a titan falter, and a new figure claimed the spotlight. JD's words had landed the decisive strike, and the imprint would last. When JD finished, a heavy silence followed, the kind that carries the weight of something witnessed. Across the country, living rooms were motionless. Coffee cooled in mugs. Families leaned forward, eyes wide. Social feeds burned as every second produced another clip. The hashtags had moved on. This moment belonged to Vance. On stage, Obama shifted, the practiced command in his voice cracking. A moderator, uneasy, asked, "Mr. Obama, would you like to respond?" He cleared his throat. But the tone was different now, less certain. He was cornered, and he knew it. Trump reclined, regal in his calm, letting his vice president take the fight. The optics were unmistakable. J.D. Vance, once a supporting figure, now stepping into the role of a leader people want to follow. Look, Obama began, voice frayed. Politics is rough. Emotions run high. But accusing me of funneling billions of corruption, that's absurd. The room didn't respond with outrage or defense. It answered with weary silence, the kind that signals people are done with explanations. JD seized the moment. His eyes narrowed, voice steady. Mr. Obama, Americans are done being told the truth is ridiculous. They've felt the consequences firsthand. They've watched their towns hollow out. They've buried loved ones because of drugs flooding through borders left unsecured. That's not an exaggeration. It's their reality. He paused, letting it settle. Around the studio, flags pressed against chests, hands tightened into fists. The debate had become more than policy pitting politician against politician. It had become a mirror held up to people's losses and grievances. And for many watching, J.D. Vance had just given that mirror a name. The studio exploded into applause. People were on their feet, clapping until their palms reddened. Obama looked taken aback. Every attempt he made to soften J.D.'s accusations only dug him in deeper. J.D. wasn't finished. He sat up straighter, composed but fierce, ready to deliver another line that would reverberate well beyond the stage. J.D. Vance squared his shoulders and spoke with a precision that snapped every camera to him. You call my words dishonest, Mr. Obama. But the folks in this room know the truth. The factory hands who lost their pensions, mothers who buried sons to overdoses, veterans left without care while others lined their pockets. These aren't talking points. They're American lives, and they remember who let them down. The crowd broke. Some wept. Others cheered. A veteran in the front row rose and offered a salute. A woman in the back covered her face and sobbed. It felt less like politics and more like something deeply personal. JD's voice found steadiness, then strength. You mock President Trump, but he's the first leader in years to put America first. He brought work back. He closed loopholes. He fought for people who'd been forgotten. Yes, his style is loud, but sometimes truth has to be loud to be heard. Obama's composure faltered. The camera cut to the young vice president, who had just quieted a former president, and across the country millions watched with eyes full of tears. Pride, relief, hope. Clips of JD's lines flooded social feeds within minutes. Teenagers on TikTok set his words to patriotic music. Grandmothers on Facebook shared the video with captions like "Finally Someone Brave." Hashtags trended. Newsrooms scrambled to reframe headlines. What had been billed as a night where Obama would dominate had flipped. J.D. Vance had become the voice for millions. People replayed the moment in diners, bars, living rooms. Some cried, some cheered along with their screams. A crew of steelworkers in Pennsylvania rose together and chanted. Back on stage, Obama grew visibly uneasy. His attempt to paint Trump as a failure had rebounded, and the spotlight was now on the young vice president rising like a storm. Trump allowed a faint smile. He recognized that this night had shifted into something beyond policy. It had become about faith, pride, and speaking plainly. Obama leaned in, his tone slow and almost pleading. America isn't perfect, he said. We all stumble. I tried to bring dignity, respect, unity to this office. I sought to build bridges, not walls. I won't let you tarnish what we fought for. A handful of polite claps met his words, but they sounded thin. The authority that once electrified rooms felt muted next to the raw intensity J.D. had ignited. J.D. waited, composed. Then, deliberate and cutting, he replied, dignity, unity. Tell that to the veterans who can't afford care. Tell that to workers whose livelihoods vanished when jobs went overseas. Tell that to the families with empty chairs because drugs poured through our borders. That was the outcome under your watch. The audience guessed. A man in the front row bowed his head and whispered, "That was my son." And the cameras caught it. Suddenly, the country felt the weight of his sorrow. Obama visibly tightened. The debate had been transformed into something human and immediate, and the nation watched, moved. JD leaned forward again, measured and resonant. "Mr. Obama, here's the plain truth. You don't despise Donald Trump because he failed. You despise him because he succeeded where you did not. He gave voice to the forgotten. He put America first. That's why people rallied behind him." His words crashed like a thunder. The room broke loose cheers, tears, clapping of the hands that shook the walls. Mothers held children, and veterans saluted with shaking hands. Faces in the crowd were wet with emotion. Obama was trying to open his mouth, but there were no words. In this, the practiced orator was thunderstruck. Trump leaned toward JD and murmured one word: "Perfect." Across living rooms, families embraced. Some dropped to their knees in prayer, grateful someone finally said what they felt. Moderators tried to regain control, but the stage had been overtaken. It was no longer a scripted exchange. It was a reckoning, and J.D. Vance had sparked something that felt impossible to douse. The studio now felt less like television and more like the nation's pulse. Cameras lingered on faces, people wiping tears, veterans standing proud, ordinary citizens clasping hands as if a long-awaited truth had been spoken aloud. Watch parties shifted into quiet gatherings, then into prayer circles. In a West Virginia town, coal miners bowed their heads, grateful to be seen. In Detroit, a family gathered around an old TV and whispered, "This is history. This is hope." Obama shifted, trying to marshal his authority, but the energy had moved on. His familiar gravitas was being drowned by the tide JD had unleashed. He pushed forward, sharpening his tone. "JD," he said, "you're young and ambitious. Don't confuse dramatic moments for leadership. History will judge you and President Trump, and it may not be kind. The country will remember the damage." He tried to summon the old fire, but the crowd's sympathy had gone elsewhere. Applause scattered. Most viewers sat with crossed arms and heavy heads. JD listened patient, then spoke with a calm that cut through the noise. "Mr. Obama," he said, "history is watching, and tonight it saw something important. Leadership is not polished speeches. It's results. Look at the results. Broken families, porous borders, promises left unkept." Thunderous applause answered him. A chant rose up, "USA, USA, USA," filling the studio, drowning out the rest. Obama's face fell. The moment had slipped from his grasp. By the time the lights dimmed and the cameras pulled back, the debate had become more than a contest of arguments. It had become a crossroads, an evening when a young vice president's words pierced the nation's quiet ache and, for many, gave it a voice. He weakened with every line he spoke, while J.D. Vance seemed to grow, steadier and firmer with each passing second. Vance straightened in his chair, leaned into the microphone, and fixed his gaze on Obama. His delivery was measured, slow, precise, impossible to forget. "You say President Trump is dangerous. You say he's arrogant," Vance began. "But the truth is plain. Donald Trump returned this country to its people. You, Mr. Obama, tried to take it away. You won't be remembered as a builder of hope. You'll be remembered as someone who tried to quiet it." The studio erupted. People stood, cheering, clapping. Some wept. Flags waved. Strangers embraced. The atmosphere surged. Fierce, electric, unstoppable. Obama sat motionless, words failing him. His silence carried as much weight as any rebuttal ever could. The great speaker had been rendered speechless. Trump reached over and laid a hand on Vance's shoulder, pride plain in his face. Cameras caught the moment. The image spread instantly across screens. The president and his vice president stood together, unbowed. Outside, spontaneous fireworks speckled the night sky. A defining instant had unfolded. Vance had not only defended the president, he had etched himself into the evening's history. USA, USA, rose through the room, shaking the set. Cameramen fought to keep shots steady as the crowd's energy nearly overtook them. Families lifted children high so they could witness the moment. Some bawled openly. Others simply stared, overwhelmed. Obama's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking about. He'd weathered tough fights before, but this felt different. Not a debate of policy, but a laying bare of conviction. Vance pivoted from the former president to the audience. "This isn't about left or right," he said. "Not Republican or Democrat. It's about America. America needs leaders who stand with its people, not those who sell them out for power." Across living rooms and kitchens, people cheered. A farmer in Iowa shut off his tractor, turned to his boy, and said, "That's courage." Trump caught Vance's eye and smiled, a small, knowing curve, aware the night had shifted. It was no longer about a clash between two men. It had become the moment JD. Vance stepped forward. Obama leaned in, voice strained. "You can stand there and lecture me, JD, but history will judge what Donald Trump has done. You may win applause tonight, but time will reveal the rest." His words carried a bitterness that didn't ring true to the crowd. The applause was muted. Murmurs of discontent rippled through the studio. The speeches that once defined Obama's legacy no longer landed. Vance closed in on the microphone again, calm and cutting. "Mr. Obama," he said, "performances are built on lines. Truth needs no spectacle. Under your watch, families lost faith. Under Trump, they found it again. That's not theater. That's reality." The crowd surged again, tears and cheers blending into a single tide. Obama leaned back, visibly shaken. His voice, for the first time in a long while, had failed him. With each sentence, Vance stopped being merely the vice president. He became, in the eyes of many, a leader they could trust. Moderators tried to steady the room, to chop at the chaos, but the audience wouldn't be quieted. Chants of "Vance, Vance, Vance" rose and were carried live into millions of homes. Overseas, soldiers watched and cheered. In nursing homes, veterans stood and saluted the screen, some weeping. Families bowed their heads in prayer, grateful for words that sounded like courage. Vance raised a hand, and slowly the din softened. He looked directly into the camera and spoke to every American watching. "Tonight, the truth has been named," he said. "This isn't about me or President Trump or Barack Obama. It's about you, the people. You are the soul of this country. No smear, no lie will silence you again." The room exploded anew. Obama's eyes dropped. He seemed defeated. Trump sat tall, visibly proud. In that instant, for so many watching, the choice had been made. Vance was no longer just defending a president. He was defending a future. The scene rippled across the globe. Broadcasters in Europe, Asia, Africa cut into programming. Headlines rewrote themselves in real time. Obama silenced. Historic clash in U.S. politics. In London, pub crowds watched in stunned silence. In Israel, commentators lauded Vance's boldness. Even where Obama had once been admired, people were asking what they had just seen. The untouchable had been challenged in plain sight. Inside the studio, Vance's composure never cracked. His words weren't laced with anger, but with conviction. "Truth isn't meant to make the comfortable comfortable," he said. It's meant to free the forgotten. Tears streamed down faces as applause washed through the crowd. Obama lowered his head, the weight of the moment settling over him. He'd expected to dominate. Instead, a younger, hungrier voice had cut through. Trump folded his arms and looked at Vance with approval. The passing of a torch, whether literal or symbolic, was no longer hidden. It was happening live. The applause shifted into something deeper, gentler, raw emotion. A veteran in the front rows, saluting through tears. A mother clutched her child and whispered, maybe now they'll have a chance. Vance blinked, moved, then steadied himself. This fight isn't for tonight alone, he said. It's for every person who felt ignored, betrayed, forgotten. You aren't forgotten anymore. The crowd's roar mixed sorrow with joy. Strangers embraced. Some sank to their knees overwhelmed. Cameras captured it all. Not just a political spectacle, but a country peeling open. Obama sat rigid, face pale, staring at the floor. The narrative had shifted. People were choosing a side, and it wasn't his. For the first time in years, many viewers wept tears of hope instead of despair. Moderators attempted a last, futile call to order. The verdict of the night had been delivered. Vance's final lines landed like a closing bell, steady, deliberate. Mr. Obama, he said, the people have seen the truth. America belongs to Americans, not to politicians who sold us out. The age of false promises is over. The age of real strength begins now. A tidal wave of applause followed. Trump leaned forward and murmured, "You did what others couldn't." Vance nodded, humble yet resolute. Across the nation, households exploded into clapping. Families rose from couches. Veterans murmured thanks. Children pointed at the screen in awe. The studio lights seemed harsher on Obama now, revealing doubt where there was once an unshakable aura. Reporters whispered, already drafting headlines. A night intended as Obama's showcase had become, in minutes, a national rebuke. The commanding voice that had once rallied millions felt diminished. Vance, composed and quiet, folded his hands and let silence do the rest. The silence of victory. Trump's expression was proud. He had fought alone for years. Tonight he stood with a partner who carried truth with both strength and humility. The audience understood it. Some wept openly, aware they had watched a political giant's decline and another's rise. Across living rooms, parents caught their children close and told them to remember the night, the courage it took to speak plainly. In Texas, a grandmother prayed, thankful for leaders who dared to stand. Soldiers overseas watched and saluted as if Vance had spoken to them directly. The standing ovation surged again. USA reverberated through the set. Vance held the moment and then offered a closing promise. This is the beginning, he said. Truth will outpace lies. Courage will outshine fear. The people, not the politicians, will lead the way. The debate concluded, but Vance's words lingered. Obama departed quietly, head bowed. Trump and Vance stood side by side as the crowd's cheers swelled. Outside, people gathered, horns honked, flags waved, strangers hugged in the streets. For those watching, something historic had happened. Lies hushed, truth on the rise. Vance's final cadence echoed. America is not broken. America is alive. With faith and courage, we will be greater. Cameras recorded every heart-stirring second. Tears, salutes, children pointing, families praying. The morning headlines would call it a defining moment. For the millions who witnessed it live, it was more than news. It felt personal. If this scene moved you, if it stirred pride or hope, don't just let it pass. Join the conversation. Like, subscribe, and tell us which line hit you the hardest. Become part of a community that stands for truth, courage, and a future worth fighting for. Let tonight be the first step toward making history together.